Today we're going to talk about residential lighting like a pro. We'll discuss lighting for your living room, your kitchen, and your rec room. Before we do that, let's take a look at a few lighting fundamentals. You know, we've all grown up thinking of light as something very, very generic, and we either have it or we don't. The switch is on or the switch is off. I kind of call that lighting for navigation and visibility, but there's so much more that we can do with light. First of all, let's talk about color. You can see that I have halogen here at 3000 degrees Kelvin, and it renders that warm vase, you know, very nice and well, warm for a warm color, but maybe not so much on the blue. Moving on then into the xenon, we can see that it's even warmer than the halogen. And so that vase really pops under that warm light of the halogen, but the blue is much more dull. Okay, the fluorescent then is 3000 Kelvin, just like the halogen, but if you look, you'll see that that cube is all filled up with light. So that's very diffuse, and it tends to cancel out the shadows. And it's the shadows that really create that three-dimensional experience. Think about your office that you might work in. Things tend to look very much like we see here, with a very cool quality of fluorescent rendering things flat. The blue vase looks great, but not so much on the warm red-orange top. So remember, warm versus cool, flat versus shadow. So let's take a look at our living room. As you can see, the room is more than adequately lit. We've got halogen downlights and a couple eyeballs aimed at the fireplace and white baffles, which, you know, is pretty typical for residential lighting. In the central part of the room, we have 4 sloped ceiling LED downlights. And aside from the fantastic energy savings you're going to get, I think what the homeowner really cares about is that 50,000 hour life, resulting in basically a complete lack of maintenance. How inconvenient is it to replace the lamp that might not be conveniently placed? Let's take a look at our first lighting technique. And this is called grazing. We're grazing with a white baffle and a 65-watt BR30 incandescent lamp on that rock wall. And you can see the most prominent thing in your visual field here is that white baffle. It actually takes the eye up towards the ceiling and away from its intended target. The white baffle spreads light everywhere, so it's very diffuse in nature. You can see it's splashing light up on the walls adjacent to my target. Let's take a look at grazing with a black baffle and a halogen lamp. And as you can see, the halogen lamps are a little punchier. They have a harder downward force, which creates a deeper shadow pattern, a little bit more texture and dimension happening there. And the eye doesn't immediately go to the fixture. It goes right to that rock. And when you look at it, it's a little bit more isolated. Because I've got the accent lighting only on that piece and not washing all over the rest of the room, I'm getting more contrast. And contrast is key. It's making things advance in the visual field. Essentially, you have to ask yourself 2 questions. What is important and what do I want people to see? Now, what's really lighting the room? That is now conspicuous in its absence because those 5 lights on the back wall just went off. You can see it's a very neutral, what we call a clear reflector, and we're using the walls as a large surface of medium to high reflectance to bounce that light back into the space. That is my rule in residential lighting. Work that perimeter first before we start aiming downlights at the floor in the center of the room. Our next technique is called wall washing. And you can see here that the wall wash is very, very smooth, even coverage. It doesn't really make that fireplace look very exciting because, like fluorescent lighting, it tends to flatten. The real purpose of a wall wash is to apply light very evenly from the point where the wall meets the ceiling all the way down in a very even blanket of light. And wall washers are typically used to bounce light into a space, light long corridors, tall walls, or in the case of this room, if we had a bookcase positioned to either side of that fireplace, that would be a perfect wall wash application. So even lighting on those book titles from top to bottom without a hot spot or that arced scallop that we so often see when we aim fixtures at the wall. So our next scene is lighting like a professional. Now, lighting like a professional doesn't mean that we've bought the most expensive fixture for every single application. What it means is, to the best of our ability, we have addressed all of the architectural features in the room, and to the best of our abilities, tried to incorporate that lighting within the architecture. What this means is that lighting design really is a collaborative art. You're working with the other trades to get the cove placed just correctly with the correct width, or to countersink a fixture in that little sill where you can see in that vase in the niche being lit. So, what's important? Well, we want people to see the glass in the niche. We want people to see the picture on the wall, which is being lit by a framing projector. And that framing projector is so precise that past the frame of that picture, the wall is in shadow. So, accent, contrast is what we're looking for here. We also have a curved, flexible, low-voltage track wrapped around our little bump out with some drop-down lights, lighting the clock and the little weather vane there. Here we're going to send a couple downlights down to put a little bit more general lighting in the space, and I'm going to use 3 hard, low-voltage Par 36 accent lights to light the head statue in the corner, the vase of flowers, and the center of the picture. Now, if you were watching carefully, when I hit the center of the picture, it really makes that print kind of open up, almost three-dimensional, like you're looking into it. And this is the result of the combination of flat light for coverage and then punching up the center with that hard beam. Okay, in theater, we call this fill light and key light. Also notice that that downlight in the center of the room is no ordinary LED downlight. That's a warm dim downlight. So when we grab that dimmer and tune it down, it warms just like a regular incandescent or halogen lamp would. Similarly, the cove lighting on the sides is also a warm dim product. Let's go to our final scene, and I call this one Cognac and Cigars. We've dialed it down considerably. There's no ambient lighting in the room, just our little touches of accent here and there where we want the eye to look. Remember, light what's important, light what you want people to see. Kitchens are the hub of the household. In addition to food preparation and cooking, a kitchen might be used to entertain guests. Our children might do their homework there. And lots of versatility is required in the kitchen. And what's going to give us that versatility is more layers of lighting, or sometimes called zones of lighting. The first one that we're going to take a look at is a 900 lumen LED 6-inch haze reflector downlight. And you can see we've got great coverage here. We're splashing light up on the vertical surfaces of those cabinets, and everything is very evenly lit. The next zone that we're going to take a look at is our 900 lumen hyperbolic fixture. And you may be wondering, how come nobody turned that fixture on? And that's because the hyperbolic gives us what we call a silent ceiling. So there is light on the surfaces, but not at the ceiling plane. Our third general illumination zone we're going to look at is going to be our 2-inch 600 lumen LED. And again, general illumination. If we moved them just a little closer to the cabinets, we could get some light up on that vertical as well. But one of the things we need to understand about LED is that the illumination spread and the amount of light that we get is not necessarily dictated by the size of the aperture. In the old days, if you wanted a lot of light and you wanted that light to really spread out, you needed a 6-inch or an 8-inch aperture. Today, we can duplicate with a 2-inch aperture what we once did with our standard residential 6-inch aperture. Our next zone, or zones, is task lighting. You can see that I've got 3 5-inch 900 lumen LED downlights right on the top of this cooking area. Fantastic task lighting. But when I step in front of it, I look like Mount Rushmore. So that grazing effect that looks so great on the fireplace in the living room doesn't really look so good on people. So we need to be careful about hard downlights over where people sit. Our next task area is going to be the countertop, where we have two 3¼ inch halogen adjustables crisscrossing that area. Certainly one might seem to do it, but you might be getting glare or reflection off the countertop, or maybe shiny pages of a cookbook stock bouncing right back up into our face. So by sending the lights from the left or to the right, intersecting at that central location, right where the task plane is, we eliminate glare for the user. For our next task zone, we're going to take a look at under cabinet lighting. And along the backsplash, you can see from left to right, we have xenon, halogen, LED puck lights, LED linear, and fluorescent. Now the fluorescent is a fabulous task light. It gives you a lot of light, it spreads it out, it's very even and very shadow-free, but it's not going to make those granite countertops sparkle, and no dimming is really kind of the deal breaker for residential lighting with the fluorescent. So we're going to concentrate, we're going to go back to our point sources, and let's take a look at the xenon. As you can see, the xenon has a very warm quality, but it's going to render that white subway tile a little bit more yellow and blah. It's not really going to sparkle white. And similarly, the blue pearl granite is not going to show too much blue under the xenon. On the other hand, if I had a finish like terracotta or perhaps some hand-painted Italian tile, that would be the perfect thing for that warm quality of light. Next comes the halogen. And the halogen's very similar to the xenon, except it has a higher top end, a little bit brighter and a little bit whiter. When you dim the halogen down, it looks very, very similar to the xenon. So they can almost be used interchangeable. But I feel personally that the halogen gives you a little bit more flexibility. Still warm, lots of sparkle, but a whiter version of incandescent. Next comes the LED, and you can see when we apply that LED to the white subway tile or to that blue pearl, we really get a nice white on that white, and I can actually see those blue flakes in that blue pearl granite. Looks great. And of course, this is another form of vertical lighting that we can see from our living room or our family room as we look back into the kitchen. Next, I'm going to talk about cove lighting with our Track 12, and you can see that we're also using it under cabinet as well. Cove lighting is a really wonderful effect that's not difficult to achieve, that gives you a greater sense of spaciousness and warmth in a space, depending on whether we dial it all the way up or tune it all the way down. So it's a very versatile product and fairly easy to understand and install. I've had many people ask me, what's your formula? How do you get it even so there's no hot spots or dead spots in my cove lighting? And the secret is a 1-to-1 ratio. If the cove lighting is 6 inches off the wall, as we've done here, then my little individual light modules should be no more than 6 inches apart, so a 1-to-1 ratio. If the lights were moved 4 inches away from the wall, then my light modules would need to be 4 inches or less apart. Very simple. It's very similar to wall washing, always a 1-to-1 ratio. Let's take a look at our mini downlights. And the mini downlights actually accomplish 4 things. The way they're positioned halfway between the door of the cabinet and the edge of the countertop gives us a grazing effect on that mitered look that's going on with these kitchen cabinets. And it's really much more interesting than the more flat effect that we got from our general downlights. Note the way that the lights line up with the door splits and solids in a very symmetrical pattern based on our cabinet layout, not based on my reflected ceiling plan, which might say 3 feet off the wall, 2 feet apart, 2 feet apart, 2 feet apart. Instead, I'm following the architecture. So that way I don't have a scallop line cutting through a cabinet at some oblique angle, creating dissonance. Lastly, let's talk about our pendants. They are onyx, natural stone, and powered by a 5-watt LED light engine. Folks, these are not task lighting. These are wine drinking lights, as contrasted with that lovely Mount Rushmore effect that we got from the downlighting task on the cooking side of that island. On the seating side of the island, we have those soft pendants, and when I'm standing there or seated at the countertop, that light comes at me laterally, filling in all the facial shadows and doing the exact opposite of what those hard downlight task lights were doing. Let's take a look at the ultra slim LED under the cabinet and in the cabinets now. This is a very slim profile linear LED product that runs off of a remote driver. That's one of the things that gives us our flexibility, being able to position it exactly where we want it with that super slim profile. You can also see that I'm lighting the cabinets with a strip going up each side. Much more effective than a puck light at the very top, trying to aim through 3 shelves of materials. Take a look at the front of the island. We're using that same ultra slim product to create a wall wash on that tile. And that tile is exactly the same as one of the previous tiles that we looked at on the backsplash. You can see, by contrast, at 3,000 Kelvin under the cabinets and on the front of the kitchen island at 4,000 Kelvin. Quite a difference in the appearance. Lastly, let's take a look at our nightlight scene. Here we're featuring our LED pendants and our solo task lights right under the sink. So just enough light to go in there and perhaps get another drink or a snack while you're watching a movie. So to recap, we looked at ambient lighting, task lighting, and accent lighting. In some cases, our task lighting performed the dual role as accent when we shine that down on that beautiful granite and kitchen hardware. Lastly, let's take a look over at our rec room. Our rec room presents some real challenges for the lighting designer. With a black ceiling, black furniture, saturated red walls, and dark carpeting, you could flood this room with light and it would never appear bright. But that's not what is appropriate for this environment. This is a dark space that gives intimacy and better visibility when we're watching a television show or a movie. If you walked around the room and sat in the different seating areas, what you would see is there's always enough light exactly where it needs to be. Now, this also should be a lesson to the less professionals in our viewing audience who are doing their own home decorating. And remember that the colors that you choose are going to drastically influence how much light is reflected back into the space. And paint manufacturers actually will give you something called an LRV, a light reflectance value, to give you an idea of how much bounce you're going to get off of those different colors. In this case, saturated red, black ceiling, black carpeting. We've completely eliminated the general ambient lighting, and we've gone specifically with a little bit of accent and focused lighting on the task areas. Now, the lighting at the card table is task lighting. It's delivered by a miniature pendant and 3 miniature downlights, and you'd be very surprised if you took out a light meter and measured those levels. We're also enhancing that with a little bit of touch of sparkle from those liquor cabinets, the wall wash, kind of bouncing a little bit of light back into the space, and lighting our poster, and adjustable precision lighting on the artwork on the wall. If we moved the conversation over to the other side of the room, to our seating area, what you'd see is that we've got ample lighting on the cabinet below the television set. We've got great downlights on the dice tables where we might put our drink and our popcorn. And over the seating areas, we're getting some nice bounce from those accent lights on the reels and the pictures. Lastly, if we're watching a movie, we've deferred totally to the wayfinding of a couple mini downlights and mini step lights, and the downlights over the dice only, which are double louvered to really tighten that beam and focus only on the lights, which don't even appear to be on. This concludes our Lighting Like a Pro residential lighting tour.